Peace and love, family. This is Dr. Umar Johnson, certified school psychologist, doctor of clinical psychology, author, and Pan-Africanist. I want to briefly talk to black parents about the emotional disturbance category, the serious emotionally disturbed special education classification. This is a very frequently used diagnosis for black boys in the school. It is one of the 13 federally defined learning disabilities contained in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004, which is the current special education law signed into existence by former President George W. Bush. Parents, there's a few things I want to say about emotional disturbance. Let me give you 5 pointers as it relates to serious emotional disturbance, or just plainly called ED, emotional disturbance. This label came to us in 1957, 4 years after the Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education, where the Supreme Court infamously ruled that race has no place within American education. You guys remember that. The famous Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall case. Well, anyhow, only 3 years after that case, just 3 years, in 1957, someone came up with this category known as emotional disturbance. This category was created particularly for black boys. Yes, other boys are also diagnosed and classified as emotionally disturbed, but the category was specifically and categorically designed to be used against black boys. Now, when we look at the criteria for serious emotional disturbance, we see that a child classified with this must demonstrate a regular pattern of behavior that suggests they are unable to build or maintain relationships with teachers and peers. So the inability to build positive, lasting relationships with teachers and peers. Number 2, we see abnormal behaviors under normal circumstances. Number 3, we see a general pervasive pattern of depression associated with being in school. And then there's a 4th category as well. But most of the time, it's the abnormal behaviors under normal circumstances, because that's a very broad catch-all category that almost anybody can subjectively be considered to have. But the most important one is the inability to build relationships with teachers and peers. Not so much with peers, but more so with teachers. The black boy's inability to build positive relationships with racist white female teachers in particular is the foundation upon which this racially stigmatizing label of emotional disturbance has been created. So I want you to know first and foremost that emotional disturbance is a racist category that was created in the aftermath of the 1954 Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education decision to be used particularly with black boys who would now be bused and forcibly integrated into predominantly white schools. And since they were not wanted and could not be tolerated by racist white teachers, they would simply label these black boys who had grown angry and despondent with the harsh, disproportionate, biased, and unfair treatment that they were receiving at the hands of white teachers. Okay? The anger is a result of the racist treatment. The inability to build these healthy relationships was the result of racist treatment. There was nothing wrong with the black boy coming into the white school. The problem was the white school that didn't want the black boy. So rather than address the racism that was causing so many black boys to become angry, rather than address the racism that came as the aftermath of the forced integration movement, rather than address the racism at black boys, they simply chose to address the reaction of black boys. Let me say that again. Instead of addressing the racism directed at black boys in America's schools, they simply decided to address the reaction of black boys to the racism. And that's why when you look at the categories under emotional disturbance, the inability to build and maintain satisfactory relationships, the abnormal behaviors under normal circumstances, and the general pervasive pattern of sadness associated with being in school, that's normal behavior for a boy being treated unfairly and being racially stigmatized. If you're being forced to go to a white school where you're not wanted, where you're being called the N-word by classmates and schoolmates and nothing's being done about it, where you have a white teacher that's making all types of obscene and racially insensitive comments about you to your face, you're going to be sad in school. You're going to react in ways that people would consider abnormal when taken outside of context. You're going to have a problem building relationships with racist white teachers and racist white children. So when you look at the criteria for emotional disturbance, you're basically looking at how black boys reacted to the forced busing and forced integration that came in the aftermath of the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. So that's number one. I want you to understand the history. That's number two. I want you to see how the diagnostic criteria for emotional disturbance simply describes the normal reaction of black boys dealing with everyday racism in America's schools. Number three, I want parents to understand that whenever the school tells you they want to evaluate your child for behavior, you should automatically say no. Let me say this again. Whenever the school says they want to evaluate your child for behavior, you should automatically say no. And the reason you should automatically say no is because the only category in special education, the only classification in special education of the 13 disabilities, the only one that speaks specifically to emotions and behaviors is the emotional disturbance. So when the principal or the teacher or the dean of students comes to you and say, he's having some emotional problems, he's having some behavioral problems, can we please evaluate your son or daughter for emotional or behavioral issues to see if they need some supports? You should say, hell no. Why should you say hell no? Because the only special ed classification that deals with behaviors and emotions is emotional disturbance. It's the only one. So you automatically know before you sign the infamous paperwork, you already know before you sign the infamous permission to evaluate form that they want to label my son. And let's be clear, the most stigmatizing label in special education arguably is the emotional disturbance. It's the most stigmatizing label. I'd rather be called speech impaired or blind or deaf, or I'd rather be called math disabled or reading disabled. But when someone says you're emotionally disturbed, think about it. You're standing in an office and they're shouting out disabilities of the children in that office. And someone says that kid has a speech problem, and that kid has a hearing impairment, and that kid has an intellectual disability, and that kid has an orthopedic impairment, and that kid has a reading disability, and that kid has a math disability. And then they turn to you and they say you have an emotional disturbance. Emotional disturbance. When you hear that, you automatically say to yourself, what in the hell is that? And although you may not know what it really means or stands for, you know clearly that you don't want no parts of the emotional disturbance. So whenever they ask you to sign permission for your child to be tested for emotions or behaviors, your answer should be no. Because the only label they can be giving your child is the serious emotional disturbance. Okay, parents? Just say no. And if he's classified with serious emotional disturbance, I can almost guarantee you 95% of the time that they're going to want to put your son in a full-time emotional support class. I can almost guarantee you. They label kids with the intent of removing them from the regular class. They label black boys with the intent of removing them from the regular class. And since you know that they label black boys with the intent of removing them from the regular class, you should never, ever, ever consent to that type of an evaluation when you know what the outcome and the agenda is going to be. No, you cannot evaluate my son. What I will do is I will bring in a psychologist to observe his behavior in the classroom, so that psychologist can come up with some strategies that both the teacher and parent can use to better work with my son. Okay, I will get my son some outside counseling through my own insurance or out of pocket. Remember, black parents, never let the school counselor counsel your child unless it's an absolute emergency. Remember, black parents, never let the school counselor counsel your child unless it is an absolute emergency, because school counselors get all in your business, all in your family's personal background. They start asking questions about things that have absolutely nothing to do with your child or the presenting issue. As a former school principal and school psychologist, I do not think it is good decision making to allow the school counselor to counsel your child. Get your own counseling, but you should get a psychologist to come into the class and observe the teacher and the student to see whether or not they are exaggerating about your child, because the truth of the matter is they do exaggerate about black boys. After all, white women aren't interested in educating black boys. Hence the exaggerations, hence the hostility. In fact, I would argue that the emotional disturbance that is so quickly accused of being a manifestation of black boy personality is really an emotional disturbance on the part of white racist educators. This is Dr. Umar Johnson, the Prince of Pan-Africanism, author of the book Psychoacademic Holocaust, the Special Education and ADHD Wars Against Black Boys. And if you ever need to get in contact with me, if you need a personal consultation with regard to saving your child from the school to prison pipeline, and saving your child from the miseducation machine, or saving your child from the mental health exploitation industry. Let me say that again, the mental health exploitation industry. You can reach me at 844-4 Dr. Umar. That's 844-4 DRUMAR, or you can text me at 215-989-9858. 215-989-9858, or you can email me at drumarjohnson@yahoo.com. DRUMARJOHNSON. Dr. Umar Johnson at yahoo.com. If you're interested in having me on your radio show, you would like to do an interview, or you would like to formally invite me to come and speak, you can also send your email to drumarjohnson@yahoo.com, or leave a voice message at 844-4 Dr. Umar, or send a text message at 215-989-9858. I will be doing many more of these videos. I am new to Patreon. I hope many of you decide to become a patron and support me and help me raise the much needed funds that allow me to continue to travel the country and travel the world, educating black people, educating African parents, and waking up the consciousness of black youth. Any video that I post on Patreon, I will not post on YouTube, I will not post on Instagram, I will not post on Facebook. All Patreon videos will be exclusive to Patreon and exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Thank you. Enjoy your day. God bless.